I recently did a couple videos on Genesis 3:15, and I'm back. We're going to hit this one more time because in those videos I was disputing the notion that it's talking about a virgin birth. Let's go ahead and read the passage really quickly. Genesis 3:15 from the English Standard Version says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Is this talking about a virgin birth? I'm Steve Perry. This is Biblical Anarchy. And today we're going to ask the second question there. If it is talking about a virgin birth, and for the sake of this video, even though I don't believe it is, we're going to presume that it is, right? So if this is talking about a virgin birth, is it talking about the birth of Jesus? Now, this might seem like a crazy question, but I want to take a look at something weird that's happening in the ensuing chapters of Genesis that might shed some light on this topic. Now, I'm going to switch over to Young's literal translation because the modern English translations fix an oddity in the Hebrew, and Young's literal doesn't. So I'm going to read it from the Young's literal translation. This is Genesis 4, verse 1. And the man knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bears Cain, and says, I have gotten a man by Jehovah. Isn't that interesting? Now, if we go to the English Standard Version, it says, Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, saying, I've gotten a man with the help of the Lord, or Jehovah, right? So they change it to with the help of, but it doesn't say that in the Hebrew. The help of is not there. She says, I have gotten a man with Jehovah. That's what it says. This would imply that Jehovah is the Father. And this is a problem, folks. Before you think I'm making up something new here, people have known about this for a long time. Now, the next verse goes on to say, and again, she bore his brother Abel. Now, Abel was a keeper of the sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. So if Adam is the father, then it would seem that if he's the father of Cain, he's also the father of Abel. Or if Jehovah is the father of Cain, he would also be the father of Abel, in my opinion. Okay, now the problem is we're reading now Adam knew Eve, his wife, as knew in a sexual sense, as in he had sexual relations with her. Could be, but the word means know, notice, hear of, learn, reveal, be, become known, realize. These are the potential meanings of the word. Now, as an idiom, it can mean that he had relations with his wife, but it doesn't necessarily. So, Targum Pseudo-Jonathan. Now, what happened was after the Babylonian captivity, the Jews began to speak Aramaic. They could no longer read their Hebrew scriptures, so the sages, the ancient rabbis, began to translate the scriptures into Aramaic, and one of the ancient translations is Targum Pseudo-Jonathan. These are not literal word-for-word translations like we have in a lot of our Bibles today, like the English Standard or the Young's Literal, right? These are more thought for thought, like maybe the New Living Translation or something along those lines. So Targum Pseudo-Jonathan translates Genesis 4:1 in the following way. And Adam knew Chava, his wife, who had desired the angel, and she conceived and bare Cain, and she said, I have acquired a man, the angel of the Lord. So here he is attributing, in this particular reading, he's attributing the birth of Cain to Jehovah or some divine being. He's saying an angel of the Lord, and it's probably referring to Samael, who was like Satan before there was Satan, like a devious angel, let's say. So this is something that's been known about for a long time. Again, this is an ancient Targum Pseudo-Jonathan is an ancient translation. Now, furthering the problem for us is Adam the father of Cain? You tell me. Let's go down to Genesis 5, the very next chapter, and verse 6. Now, I'm going to verse 6 because I want to establish a pattern in these genealogies, right? So verse 6 tells us, when Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. Seth lived after he fathered Enosh 807 years and had other sons and daughters, as all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Now, this is a template that is going to continue to be used throughout the passage. So, blank lived blank years, fathered blank, lived after he fathered him blank years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of blank were blank years, and he died. This is a template. We're just like copying and pasting names, inserting them in there. So it says, when Enosh had lived 90 years, fathered Canaan. Enosh lived after he fathered Canaan 850 years, had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. Okay, see the pattern? Next one, Canaan lived 70 years, fathered Mahalalel. Lived another 840 years, other sons and daughters. Thus the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. Mahalalel lived 65 years, fathered Yared. Lived another 830 years, other sons and daughters. All the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. Yared lived 162 years, fathered Enoch. Lived another 800, sons and daughters. 962 years, he died. Enoch lived 65 years, fathered Methuselah. Now, here suddenly, we're out of our template, because it says Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Weird, right? All the rest is just lived these years and he died, lived these years and he died, lived these years and he died. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, because God took him. What's the author trying to say? Now, some Second Temple Jews and Christians take this to mean that Enoch never died, that he just ascended up into heaven. In other words, the odd language in this one part of the genealogy makes them question, did Enoch die, since it's worded differently? Going back to the beginning of the chapter, Genesis 5:1, this is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. So he created them, how? In the likeness of God, right? We already knew that from Genesis 1. But what gets interesting, when Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image. Is this saying that this son isn't in the image of God? Maybe. Who knows? I mean, we like to think man is made in the image of God, and then that gets passed on from Adam to everybody else. We're all made in the image of God. But what about Seth? Why does it specify right after telling you that God made man in his image, but then say Adam had Seth in his image, right? Weird. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Now, hold on a second. Why is this passage acting like Seth is the first child of Adam? We know he had Cain and Abel, right? What? Why is Seth this? I mean, the rest of these, you get the firstborn son, the age of the father when that son was born, how many years he lived afterward, how many years he lived in total, and then he died. But here we get Seth. He's not the firstborn son. But Adam lived 130 years, fathered a son in his own likeness after his image, and named him Seth. Like, it's going out of its way to tell you that this is his firstborn son, right? The Cain and Abel weren't his sons. Like, it certainly can be read this way. I'm not saying it's what it means. It can be read this way. Thus, all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Now, we get one other instance of this odd genealogy, or these standard genealogies becoming odd, and that's the last one, which is Noah. Okay? Because Noah is the son of Lamech, and he's about to be in the flood narrative. So his is different. Okay? Because, notice here it says, Lamech lived after he fathered Noah thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japhet. So it gives you all three sons, and it doesn't go on to tell you Noah died, because we're going into the story of the flood, right? So Lamech is the last one to tell us he died. But notice what it says with Lamech. When Lamech, starting in verse 28, had lived 182 years, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that Jehovah has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. So it seems like this one is going to undo the curse that God put on the earth, right? out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Now we go back to Genesis 3:15, right? Here the serpent is being cursed. And what does God say? Let's start at the beginning of the curse. Jehovah God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Right? So the offspring of the serpent, Cain, is going to bruise the heel of the offspring of the woman and Adam, right? In other words, these aren't two separate, they are two separate offsprings, right? One is a descendant of Jehovah. Folks, this is theoretical. Don't get mad at me here, okay? One is a descendant of Jehovah and Eve through Cain, and the other is a descendant of Adam and Eve through Seth, right? And the descendant of Jehovah and Eve, Cain, is going to bruise the heel of the descendants of Adam and Eve, but one particular descendant of Adam and Eve is going to crush the head of the serpent and his descendants, of Cain and his descendants. So we come back to our genealogy, and suddenly this could explain why we have a genealogy of Adam here. Why is it necessary? Well, this is establishing that Noah is a descendant of Seth and not Cain. Why is that important? Well, let's go to the next chapter, Genesis 6:1. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God, descendants of Cain. Now, see, the rabbis are going to tell you the opposite. The sons of God are the righteous descendants of Seth, and the daughters of man are the descendants. But I think they have it backwards here, right? The descendants of Cain, who was born of Eve and Jehovah, the sons of God, saw that the daughters of man, Cain and Abel, were attractive, Adam and Eve, were attractive, and they took them as their wives, any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Now, I've already explained that I think this has a different meaning than what I'm presenting here. And the reason for that is I tend to read the first 11 chapters of Genesis through the lens of the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is material that the authors and the audience would have had at the time, and it makes sense to me that some of this story is being based on that pop culture reference from that time, let's say. But if we read the Bible as a closed unit with no outside influence, it seems to me that the most logical way to read this is that God is the father of Cain and Abel, not Adam. And that Adam is the father of Seth, and that Noah is the descendant who crushes the head of the serpent, right? Because we read it right there, and this is what Lamech says, when his son Noah is born, he says, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. So if I were to read Genesis 3:15 as talking about a virgin or miraculous birth of some sort, to me, that birth is Cain and Abel, who are born of a relationship between Eve and Jehovah. Now, again, this is not the only way to read this, and this is not even my preferred view. This is not the way I think the story works best. But it works better than reading a virgin birth thousands of years later into the text. We have all the necessary information right here in the next 3 chapters to explain what this verse is talking about in the context of the story without having to go outside of the context of the story and read something else in. And it's always best to get the information from the immediate surrounding context, in my opinion. What's your opinion? You got a different view on this story? Do you see some kind of error in my logic here? If so, let me know in the comments down below. But if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, subscribe to the channel. Whatever you do, don't just sit there. Do something.